Welcome to Navigating Advocacy, the true crime podcast that goes beyond storytelling to ignite change and seek justice. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Whitney. As true crime enthusiasts turned passionate advocate, we've seen the power of storytelling raise awareness about unsolved crime and bring hope to victims and their families. We hope to inspire action and promote positive change within the true crime community.
Our definition of action-oriented advocacy is doing something more than just talking about the issues. It's taking concrete steps to address them. We're here to empower you to also become advocates for change, no matter where or who you are.
We are Navigating Advocacy.
We discuss topics that may be sensitive to listeners.
Discretion is advised.
In an attempt to make a positive change in New Mexico, we chose to navigate advocacy in Albuquerque. Albuquerque, New Mexico is a vibrant city nestled in the heart of the Southwest, known for its rich cultural heritage and stunning desert landscapes. It's a place where history meets modernism. Most know it from Breaking Bad or the annual balloon fiesta, where hundreds of hot air balloons enter the sky in a beautiful and dramatic art display. However, its safety is another story. While Albuquerque boasts a unique blend of cultures and traditions, it has also faced challenges related to crime rates. In recent years, the city has grappled with higher than average, particularly in property crime and violent crime categories. In fact, NeighborhoodScout.com gives Albuquerque a 1. That means 99% of other U.S. cities are safer than Albuquerque. In 2022, there were 120 homicides reported. On average, 10 people a month were murdered. Over 500 rapes were reported, over 5,500 assaults, and over 1,600 robberies.
When looking into New Mexico, we chose to go to the person we know has the same action-oriented drive and is more than familiar with the area. Eric Carter-Landin, for those who don't know, is the creator of True Consequences and Crime Lines and Consequences podcasts. He was forced into the world of true crime and advocacy when his baby brother was murdered over 35 years ago. That very same year, countless Albuquerque juveniles lost their lives to homicide. When choosing a case for this quarter's action-oriented advocacy, Tyra Perry's stood out above others. It's a heartbreaking story of a 16-year-old girl whose life was tragically cut short, along with the life of her unborn child.
As almost every true crime podcast says, Tyra Perry had her whole life ahead of her. Given the time period, there's not a lot of information about who Tyra was or who she wanted to become. It's interesting to see how much social media has changed how we can learn about a person. We do know that in early December of 1987, Tyra moved in with her grandparents, Sedalia and Charles, and that her parents were divorced. One of Tyra's friends mentioned that she had moved in with her grandparents because her mother was originally not accepting of Tyra's pregnancy, and her mother was incarcerated at the time. Tyra was around 5 months pregnant. She had enrolled in the New Futures High School on October 12, 1987. New Futures is a school for pregnant and teenage parents to be able to finish their high school careers and prepare for post-secondary education.
While Tyra was enrolled, she struggled with attendance, regularly skipping days, or she would arrive in the morning and leave early, claiming she felt unwell. This would happen 3 or 4 times a week. December 7th was the last day Tyra was in attendance. Tyra had told her friends that she didn't like living with her grandparents. They were more strict than her mother, and she lacked the freedom she once had. Her friends suggested that she stay with her grandparents for 2 more weeks, and if she was still struggling with living there, she could move in with her. Tyra's last known whereabouts were on December 28, 1987. Tyra had told her grandmother that she was going on a date. Sedalia couldn't remember if Tyra had told her the man's name or not, but she was picked up from their home around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She did describe him as being over 5 foot tall, had short black hair, was between 20 and 25 years old, and had a bandage on his left cheek. When Tyra didn't return from her date, Sedalia reported her missing on December 31st, 1987, and she was entered into the system as a missing juvenile on January 1st of 1988.
January 2nd, 1988, a man was chasing his dog in an attempt to catch it on Forest Road 333B. This road runs along the base of La Luz Trailhead in the Sandia Mountains on the northeast side of Albuquerque. His dog ran into the ravine on the south side of the road and brought his attention to what he believed was a body. As he moved closer to verify that was indeed what he was seeing, it became clear that it was the body of a black male or female. He ran back to his car, drove to a phone, and contacted the sheriff's department. The deputy returned to the scene with the witness, where he directed him down into the ravine. Detective Olivares confirmed that he had found the deceased body of an African-American female wearing a lightweight, dirty, and stained jacket and black leggings. She was laying on her back with her legs bent underneath her. The medical examiner took the body for autopsy, and the area was processed as a crime scene. According to the supplementary reports, the scene was sectioned off and items were taken into evidence. Investigators were unable to find any identifying items with the body.
Detective Olivares had the witness retrace his steps to ensure his tire tracks and footsteps would be logged and accounted for. The witness stated that he had gone down the dirt pathway at least 2 times at that point and showed the detective which direction he approached the body from. Additional detectives videotaped the area to log into evidence as well. There were tire tracks at the scene suggesting a vehicle had backed down from the roadway and then pulled forward. Perhaps these are from the murderer when they dumped the body. The medical examiner noted that this woman had blunt trauma and bruises under her chin as well as multiple stab wounds to her right side and lower back, revealing this as the cause of death. Still not having an identity of the decedent, Detective Brown worked with a composite sketch artist that worked with the Albuquerque Police Department.
As the investigation progressed, strange details emerged. On January 6, 1988, a tip came in after a news report was broadcasted. A salesperson from a nearby dealership called in about finding the contents of a purse in the Wantabo picnic area on the side of the road. This area wasn't far from where the body was discovered. Most of the items originally seen had blown away, but some items recovered were papers and receipts, but ultimately deemed irrelevant. News outlets broadcasted the sketch the evening of January 6th and on the 7th. Sedalia contacted law enforcement, inquired about whether the sketch could be Tyra. Detective Olivares met Tyra's grandparents at the Office of Criminal Investigations, where she positively identified her granddaughter. Sedalia and Charles sat down with investigators to discuss the last day they had seen Tyra. Her grandfather attempted to describe the man she was last seen with to the sketch artist, but only having one interaction with him, her grandfather wasn't confident in his description. When investigators asked Mr. and Mrs. Aiken about who the father of Tyra's unborn child was, they were unsure. Tyra's friends believed it to be a man by the name of Wayne Jones. He was incarcerated at the time of Tyra's murder.
The same day Tyra was identified, an informant that was being held in the Bernalillo County Detention Center told detectives they were an acquaintance of Tyra's when she was engaging in sex work. While Tyra claimed to this individual that she was not working for any one handler, it was believed that Tyra worked for Tyra's mother's ex-boyfriend, Terry Seaton. This informant also was under the impression that Tyra was working as a sex worker with the consent of her mother. They also mentioned that Tyra's mother forced Tyra to perform favors for a group of people of Cuban descent in exchange for narcotics. In an attempt to create a list of potential persons of interest or any enemies of Tyra, Detective Brown reached out to Tyra's mother to inquire. She stated that Seaton may use Tyra as fuel to anger or hurt her. The second person she mentioned was a woman. We are going to call Denise, as we don't want to jeopardize any trials. Tyra and Denise had gotten into a physical altercation over the potential father of Tyra's child. The two got in a fight in a bar earlier in the year, and Tyra hit Denise, cutting her near her eye with a beer bottle. The cut was severe enough to require surgery. Tyra would eventually get charged with battery. The friction between the two women continued, and Denise even dug a grave in Kirkland Park, threatening to solicit someone to kill Tyra and bury her there. Tyra's mom also knew that Denise was dating a male that also had a bandage on his face.
The web of relationships in this case grows more and more intricate. A confidential informant notified detectives that Tyra had been seen in a vehicle with a man, let's call him Brian. He was an airman at the Kirtland Air Force Base and Denise's current boyfriend. Brian and Denise had met in November of 1987 at the Cheers nightclub. From that night, the two began talking regularly on the phone and going on dates. They went to the movies, would hike in the tramway area, or just hang out at Denise's house. During an interview on January 21st, 1988, Brian told law enforcement that he picked Tyra up on the day of her disappearance for a date. He said he picked Tyra up around 12:30 p.m. on December 28th, and they cruised around Central Avenue. They stopped at a 7-Eleven convenience store at 3801 Central Avenue Northeast. Brian went into the store and looked out at the window to see Tyra talking to a black male. He said this male tried to slap Tyra and then forced her into a white Cadillac with chrome wheels, white sidewall tires, and maybe a telephone antenna with tinted windows. The man he saw was wearing a white Fila jogging suit and Gazelle brand sunglasses.
Brian assumed the man was Tyra's boyfriend and angered that she was with him. He continued on with his day. He just grabbed some lunch at a nearby Wienerschnitzel. He made his way back to the Air Force Base to study and just hang out. He mentioned he talked on the phone for a while with Denise. Denise never mentioned to Brian the extent of how she knew Tyra. Brian said when he first met Tyra a week prior to her murder, it was outside of that same 7-Eleven storefront where she was forced into the Cadillac. He said she was wearing a short black leather skirt, fishnet stockings, and a red jacket, and she was crying. He asked if he can help her, and she appeared scared. She said her name was Michelle Johnson. She did accept a ride home from him. He took her to an apartment complex located on Zuni and Espanola Southeast, and she entered an apartment there. He told detectives that he thought she was attractive and asked her out on that day. Brian was later given a polygraph, and the administrator stated he passed. Detectives put together some photos and presented them to Brian, looking to receive an identification of the man that forced Tyra into the white vehicle. Based on the pictures they had, Brian could not point out positively who it may be.
Now equipped with this white vehicle lead, detectives reached back out to Tyra's mom to see if she knew of any acquaintances or clients that Tyra may have had that drove large white Cadillacs that met the description. She said no, but that she did know of one handler that drove a large white Buick that also had tinted windows. She said it could have easily been mistaken for a Cadillac and that this man was known as Spanky. Tyra's investigation began to slow, even with all of the leads they had already received. On March 28, 1988, Tyra's mother's suspicions that Terry Seaton may be the father of Tyra's baby propelled her to reach out to investigators. She felt that maybe Tyra was using the child as blackmail over Seaton. She feared that this could have angered him. Seaton at the time was not in New Mexico. He was known to be living with his mother in California. However, before he had left for the Golden State, an acquaintance of his had heard that he was going to tell one of the Cuban admirers who killed Tyra that he knew who it was, but never revealed the information. This acquaintance also said she knew that Tyra was going to get money from Seaton by using the unborn child. There's also a rumor that Seaton and her mother owed this group of Cuban men a significant amount of money, and perhaps Tyra is who paid the price. A year from Tyra's murder passed, with the investigation having more questions than answers. Brian and Denise had gotten married. When she was re-interviewed, she revealed that her and Tyra had issues and that they were both dating Wayne Jones at the same time. She shared all of the same rumors with the addition of one more. She said that Tyra was seen at a party with a strange male, and then she was never seen alive again.
Tyra's case came to a standstill until 2001, when Detective Rolfs opened the file in hopes to make advancements. He found in the file a statement that there was a woman, we're going to call her Lisa, and she had told the Albuquerque Police Department that Seaton had confessed to her that he did stab and kill Tyra. It was on New Year's that Seaton had come over acting strangely and sweating profusely. Lisa and Seaton went out later in the evening, returned, and freebased cocaine. After getting high, Seaton let it slip that he had stabbed Tyra to death. Investigator Rolfs could not find how this statement had made it into the file or if any follow-up discussions were had. Attempts to find Lisa went unsuccessful, but they did speak with her mother. He also reached out to Tyra's mother, who still believed that Terry Seaton had something to do with Tyra's murder. She told the detective that she struggled with some memory issues, but she would be available to law enforcement for as much as they needed to help Tyra's case. Continuing through the case file and reviewing the crime scene film footage, Investigator Rolfs reached out to the deputy district attorney to determine if they should submit the evidence for DNA testing. He named two suspects, Brian and Seaton.
It would be June before the detective was able to meet with Brian to review his statement. Brian was now a deputy at the Albuquerque Police Department. When he sat down with the investigators, they asked him how he met Tyra. Brian stated it was at a barber shop, which contradicted his original statement that he had met her at a 7-Eleven. When asked about the last time he saw Tyra, Brian said that they had gone on a date. He picked her up at her grandparents' home. They drove around, and he said they went to Bullhead Park. But he wasn't familiar with the area very well, but somehow he remembered the name of the park. Brian went on to say that they finished their date, but it hadn't gone well because she was not his kind of person. Yet another contradiction from his previous statement back in 1988. The investigator asked if Brian recalled telling him about the incident with Tyra being forced into the Cadillac. He then said that he remembered that and that he thought she was getting into the car with her boyfriend. He was upset that she was with him. The investigators read Brian's 1988 statement back to him, and after refreshing his mind, Brian admitted that it made more sense that he did meet Tyra outside of 7-Eleven, as he originally reported. When asked if he would be willing to submit a DNA sample, he agreed.
On June 9, 2001, investigator Rolfs was able to locate Lisa, who had been detained. When prompted, she stated that she had remembered talking to investigators about Tyra's murder, and she remembered asking for compensation in excess of $1,000 in an attempt to get him to confess again on tape. She then said that she gave up on detectives and was tired of waiting on them. Lisa again shared that Seaton told her he had beaten Tyra, hot-shotted her, and stabbed her. He said that he had told her on more than one occasion and that he eventually got braggy about it. She told investigators that Seaton was back in Albuquerque and that he was living in a motel. She agreed to attempt to contact him after she was released from the detention center in a couple of days if the investigator would help her with her current charges. After she was released, Lisa sat down again with investigators and told them about the day Tyra was murdered. Lisa said that Tyra and her handler were at her home, that Seaton attempted to overdose Tyra to the extent that she lost control of her faculties and had Peter Pans. Lisa was able to revive her, and Seaton took Tyra and left. He then returned the following day again, confirming that Seaton was sweaty and nervous. They procured some cocaine, and once he was high, he confessed that he had gotten into an argument with Tyra, that they went into the mountains, and that he killed her and left her there. He had only meant to beat her up, but according to Lisa, his words were that, quote, he went too far, end quote. Lisa went on to say that his motive was that he couldn't make part with Tyra being pregnant. She stated that that was all she knew and asked for further assistance with her current case. Investigator Rolfs told her he would try, but he didn't have much pull over the current situation.
From here, Tyra's case turns cold, and the file continues to collect dust. It wouldn't be until 2013 when the Sheriff's Department established a cold case unit webpage that features many of the unsolved cases and photos of victims that a law enforcement representative would reach out in regards to Tyra's case. In January, Lieutenant Kingsbury mailed a letter inquiring for a photo of Tyra to share. He also was able to meet with her mother again. In this interview, Tyra's mother told Lieutenant Kingsbury that Seaton was now deceased. While interviewing Tyra's mother, he inquired about a few persons of interest from various leads he found inside Tyra's case file. One being known as Cue Ball, who had potentially been incarcerated in Huntsville, Texas. Tyra's mother did not know who he was. She also had no recollection of any of the other photos of individuals inside the case file. When investigating further, no records indicated any aliases connected to the name Cue Ball showing up in the system. This is where Tyra's case stands to this day. No new leads, no arrests, and no closer to an answer to who murdered the 16-year-old mother-to-be.
In our own research, we struggled to find any media coverage of Tyra's murder. Minimal newspaper articles. Yes, law enforcement put a couple of news reports out with the sketches, but there was no push to find answers. No other podcast has covered Tyra's story that we can find. This is one reason why we chose this story. Why hasn't there been more coverage, more discussions? Crime in Albuquerque, New Mexico is off the charts. With this case being 35 years old, we struggled with what sort of action-oriented advocacy would make the greatest impact. The majority of these persons of interest and witnesses could be deceased or have no recollection of the incident. Our chance of encouraging just one person to come forward is slim to none. But we knew something needed to be done. We refused to accept that people are willing to just forget about a 16-year-old mother-to-be. We also knew that given Albuquerque's crime rates, there were hundreds upon hundreds of other victims that also needed to be advocated for. Deciding the best way to make some noise is always the hardest part. We decided that a honk and wave event was going to bring the most attention to these victims' stories. For those that have never participated or seen a honk and wave, it is exactly what the name says. You create some posters, stand on a street, and passers-by to honk their horns and wave as they go by.
Deciding that our greatest impact could happen downtown at the courthouse located right beside the police station, we set out contacting other families and organizations, inviting them to make some noise with us. We recruited the help of the New Mexico Crusaders for Justice. The Crusaders are an advocacy group that was born out of necessity by families of victims of homicide. They help provide support, resources, education, and understanding for families of homicide victims. We put a call out on social media, community calendars, and as many Facebook groups and pages we could find. On August 19th, 2023, we hosted the Honk and Wave for Justice Against Violence. It was a hot day as we gathered on the stairs at Civic Plaza with a stack of poster boards, a million Sharpies, and a heart full of determination. I always get a bit anxious before these events. These families are hurting so much, and yet they still have to get up every single day and scream at the top of their lungs, hoping that just one more person hears about their loved one. When we plan events like these, we always hope for 5, maybe 10 people to show up. Heck, even just one family makes it worth it. I personally was not prepared for the over 60 people to show up with a week's notice to advocate with us.
Standing there with Tyra's photo and meeting the families of other victims, hearing Alana Gamboa's mother talk about how her 19-year-old daughter was murdered because the gun violence is out of control. Meeting Antonio Jaramillo's mother, who is a co-founder of the Crusaders. Antonio was also lost to gun violence. Kyle Martinez was a victim of a drive-by shooting by someone who had been let out on bail for a previous drive-by. Kyle's mother, another Crusader co-founder, is out there still advocating for change on a legislative level. 2 months before our honk and wave, 19-year-old Nick Ortega and 18-year-old Marcos Perez were murdered when a party turned into a fight. Talia Wills was a 19-year-old mother who was murdered in front of her toddler less than a week before our event.
Eric has been seeking justice for over 35 years for Jacob. Just like Tyra, the case file sits closed, collecting dust and getting further and further from resolution. Walking with the families to the courthouse was both heart-wrenching and motivating. The chants of no justice, no peace echoed off the surrounding buildings. Many tears flowed and hundreds of horns honked. We yelled until we were hoarse, hugged and promised one another to continue pushing these stories into the world, hoping for justice, but demanding change. We wanted to add a few questions and answers to sum up a few of the things that might have been confusing. Also, to give everyone an overview of what our time was like while in New Mexico. How big was Albuquerque back in this time period, 1988, 89? Because how many people are interconnected in this web with Tyra and Denise dating the same people more than once kind of boggled my mind.
480,000 people lived there then.
Yeah, it was a fairly large city, but Albuquerque has one of those things where even as it gets bigger, it's still very much a small town. You can go to the grocery store and you're going to see people that you know or people that you've known. You're going to run into people at restaurants that you've known for a long time. It's not like super spread out in the sense that you're not going to run into your friends. So I do think that there is, especially in kind of what we call now the International District. It used to be called the War Zone. And that's exactly where Tyra was. She was kind of hovering between Nob Hill and the War Zone. And the War Zone, now rebranded as the International District, was a very dangerous part of the city. There was a lot of sex work happening. There was a lot of drug sales. There was a lot of, there still is, but at that time in the 80s and 90s, it was kind of at its peak. And I actually worked in that area around the same time, not in the 80s, but in the 90s, when things were still very much like sex work was happening in the parking lot of the restaurant that I worked in, that I managed. Wow. We had people that were shooting up in the booths of the restaurant that I was working in. So this was during this time frame, and even beyond that, for that whole decade, it was a very dangerous part of town. But a lot of these people that were moving in these circles, they knew each other. And I think that still happens today, even as the International District has kind of cleaned up a little bit. There's still a lot of problems with drug use and there's still some sex work that happens. So I think that it's not out of the question that there would be so many overlapping stories in a case like this.
What's even crazier about this is there was zero information out there. All of our research came from police reports, which thankfully we got, or this would be a 2-second long episode because we have 4 sentences on Tyra. That's all we had out there to the general public. And what's even crazier is we condensed down the case file that they had. There's 5, 6, 7 other people that we didn't even talk about that could potentially have some information.
Agreed. There were already so many key players that definitely had to limit the number just to keep the flow of it going. But the fact that there are 2 men seemingly from different walks of life, that both could have had a hand in this.
Yeah, I think it's the tragedy, to your point, Whitney, is really looking at the way the whole case, I mean, it does seem like the investigators were invested in trying to solve this case, but there's still that level of the media not really caring about a young Black sex worker. Like, it's something that we continue to see to this day. And I think that it was especially bad in the late 80s and early 90s because sex workers and people who use drugs were often seen as not worthy of justice, not worthy of answers whenever they would go missing or that they would eventually get murdered. And so I think what we're seeing here with this case, and I'm thankful to the state police and the other investigating departments that did look into the case, because there is a robust case file. There is a lot of information in there, but it's so sad to think that if she would have maybe had a little bit more media coverage, maybe somebody that knew something and had proof could have come forward at the time.
Or if there wasn't such a large gap in the minimal coverage there was some sketches that got out there in 1988 and then nothing again until 2001 when the case was essentially reopened. Allegiances have changed, or maybe they've stepped out of that circle of people and they're ready to talk, or maybe they're even incarcerated and they can come up with some sort of deal to get some more information. There's so many avenues that could have opened between 1988 and 2001, and then again between 2001 and 2013. It's just the gap is too wide.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Like we said, like the people could be deceased or not remember, and then finding the evidence to actually arrest someone and then convict them is, I don't want to say near impossible, but it's going to be lengthy. Unless they can do some kind of DNA testing. I wonder, I don't know about the baby, because they never really stated who the father of the baby really was.
And I don't know that they took any sort of testing opportunities during the autopsy to find out.
Yeah. I think too that was at the infancy stages of DNA being used in investigations. So they may not have even thought of it as an opportunity. But I am encouraged though that there was DNA collected at the scene. And I'm hopeful that maybe through that there's some opportunity to uncover who it was. Now, if it was Seaton, it's unfortunately going to be too late for him to face any kind of consequences for what he's done because he's dead now. But I'm just wondering if they ever took the opportunity to get his DNA, or if he ever committed an offense that required his DNA to be submitted. It would be something interesting and worth looking at.
I do know that he was incarcerated on more than one occasion. Whether or not it's something for them to have that on file, I don't know.
Tragic case.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to say that I really am grateful to both of you for coming to New Mexico and for bringing this case and bringing it forward, because it's something that I have a long list of unsolved cases that I need to get to. And just having you here, going through and doing the honk and wave, like there was something very powerful about being there with all of those families, and to see how many people showed up, like just really inspired me and motivated me in a way that I was not expecting and I was not prepared for. But I'm super, super grateful that it happened, because like even to have my mom out there with us chanting, and she lost her voice too. Like that was just such a special moment. And I still have people reaching out to me to this day from that event asking for help covering their cases. So I think that was an awesome thing that you guys put together. And I'm so glad that you invited me to be a part of it.
Oh, once you get into the action-oriented advocacy and doing things like outdoors like that, it is so different. It's definitely gets you motivated to do more. And so we love it.
It's addicting.
Helped us.
It's so addicting. The adrenaline that you receive. And then even that following week, we had one of the families reach out to us, say, please come out. We're going to do this again. This was amazing. So they're continuing now to do it on their own. It doesn't require, it's not a lot of effort. It takes next to no effort, and you do not have to have any sort of skill set to do it.
Yeah. And it worked. It got the attention of the media. It got the attention of the people that were driving by. And I think it helped the families to feel like they were being heard.
And that they weren't alone.
Exactly.